A special Thursday evening edition of Locked On Lakers. Brian Kamenetzky, Andy Kamenetzky, Rob Pelinka, Lakers GM, spoke to the media on Thursday ahead of next week's media day. Had some interesting stuff to say about offseason priorities, about a slim LeBron James, and some big expectations defensively for Talen Horton-Tucker. We'll talk about all of it next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I want to let you know that Thursdays on the Locked On NBA podcast, Jackson Gatlin and Matt Moore are telling you whose NBA stock is up and who is down. Follow the Locked On NBA podcast today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We didn't know he was going to be doing this, and Rob
was not
Pelinka
announced until earlier today. So
Thursday afternoon.
Nobody knew.
Pelinka gets in front of the media, as you know, guys typically do ahead of media day. The GM or the coach will speak, and took a lot of questions, about 25 minutes worth of questions, and some interesting stuff came out of it. Let's start with just what he had to say about offseason priorities, because that obviously frames everything that the Lakers ended up doing. He laid out three of them. The first one, find another primary ball handler. That's basically, I would say, a redo on last year's number one goal, which was find another primary ball handler, and filled that with Russell Westbrook. Shooting was number two. And the third one was pretty interesting too. Get back to the old center model. He talked about going back to having what they had a couple years ago, defensive, rebounding oriented centers, which explains, at least to some degree, the Dwight Howard return and the acquisition of DeAndre Jordan. Which parts of that you want to kind of get into? Because I thought particularly numbers 1 and 3 were particularly interesting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, another primary ball handler is Russell Westbrook. I mean,
yes.
you don't find guys in the league who are, more dominant on the ball. Saying that without any disparaging context to it. I'm just saying.
No, I mean, the guy's averaged over 10 assists a game in like 5 of the last 6 seasons or something. He is a ball handler.
Right. He is a ball handler. He is ball dominant. He creates for others. He can run sets, all of that stuff. And that's obviously something that they were looking for with Westbrook. And, they made a very, very major, roster complexion changing move in bringing in Westbrook. But what I also thought was interesting too is you could look at that in a, not to the same degree, but still notable context of bringing in Kendrick Nunn and what they are hoping for in THT. Because when Kendrick Nunn is out there, depending on the way the breakdowns of the second unit, where you and I both anticipate he's going to end up playing, the way those shake out, he could be a primary ball handler in those groups. Talen Horton-Tucker could potentially be a primary ball handler in those groups.
I disagree with it. Push a little bit back on that. See, what I think I'm looking forward to seeing in those moments, like let's say you have neither LeBron nor Westbrook on the floor at the same time, which I'm not sure how often that's going to happen, but it'll happen at least sometimes. In those positions, theoretically, AD's out on the floor. But I mean, Nunn is not a classic point guard.
No, I agree, but he's a ball handler.
He is you're right. But like in terms of a ball handler or distributor, an offense initiator paired with THT. Like, I think if they can get mileage out of a lineup like that with AD and let both of the, Westbrook and LeBron rest or something, like there's going to be a need. I think you're right to find alternates beyond LeBron and Westbrook, and that's where Nunn certainly could. And THT, I think they really are hoping can fill that role and let Nunn be more of a scorer in that kind of combination.
Sure, but the point I was making though is just the idea that the Lakers over the last couple of years have had certain guards that, all things being equal, you really don't want handling the ball that much at all. Danny Green comes to mind. KCP often came to mind. Alex Caruso would have his moments where you would look for him doing that, and times where he looked like he was making strides in that progression, and then other times where it's like he's just not there yet. I think I would imagine at least that they look at Nunn and THT as being, if nothing else, potentially ahead of all the guys that I just mentioned in terms of just a ball handling role of note.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and obviously though, the way that they attacked question one with acquiring Russell Westbrook impacts number two, which is it increased the impetus to find shooting in every way. And we don't know yet if they solve that problem, if there's going to be enough shooting to go around Westbrook, just because of the spacing issues that Westbrook's presence creates. It's not, this is obviously something we've talked about in the offseason and we'll continue to talk about. What you cannot accuse the Lakers of is ignoring the problem. They certainly went out and threw everything they possibly could at it with the idea of, you are limited in to some degree with what you can spend. You can't just go out and get anybody. It's got to be minimum guys, or in the case of none, your taxpayer mid-level. Between Monk, Ellington, Nunn, Bazemore, and am I forgetting anybody? That's four guys who shot between 37 and 41% last year from three. I mean, it's something like that. And even Ariza is not incompetent from that. He's not like a terrible 3-point shooter. He's just not great. He's 35%, 34, 3, somewhere in there, but he's at least competent. Oh, Carmelo Anthony.
Right. And it's good that you mentioned Melo. I mean, just for inclusion, but also too, like, I thought it was interesting when Pelinka, he was asked, I don't remember what the question was, but specifically about Melo.
It was about how Melo, like the role on the team, like what do you expect him to do and all that stuff.
And he was very specific in talking about Melo as a catch and shoot guy and like somebody who's been among the best catch and shoot guys in the league over the last couple of years. And he said that was a type of outside shooter specifically that they were missing, which makes a lot of sense when you're talking about guys like LeBron and Russell Westbrook and maybe at his best, Talen Horton-Tucker, who go downhill a lot. And you want to make sure that you really put a premium on them going downhill and it was crazy about it.
It was really crazy to me. And it's not in an inaccurate way or like so stupid to sign him that way or it's limiting or whatever. It was crazy to hear Carmelo Anthony accurately and appropriately kind of described and pigeonholed into that role. Like that is exactly what you want 37-year-old Carmelo Anthony at this point in his career to be. Pelinka noted too, he's still a really physically strong guy. When we had, who was it from? It was Mike Richmond, right? From Locked On Blazers. He pointed out, like, if Melo even sniffs a guy that he thinks can't guard him in the post, he will abuse him down low, particularly if it's a younger player. And he, Rob pointed out that capability, but fundamentally what they want from him is a spot up catch and shoot guy. And it was just, it's crazy to hear Carmelo Anthony, one of the most dynamic offensive players of any generation, described that way. It was just a sign of the times that I thought was interesting. One quick thing to get, and then obviously with number three, the third part of those priorities,
the two large traditional center model, which is going to make a lot of people somewhere between nervous and skeptical. It reinforces what I've been saying the last couple of weeks. I am going to need to see Anthony Davis, at best starting, at worst playing the majority of minutes at center to believe it. DeAndre Jordan, as I pointed out the last time we talked about this, Brian, signed with the Lakers like 22 seconds after he cleared waiver, or after he even actually got moved.
Oh, it was a done deal before. It was a done deal before he even, Yeah, it was the minute it happened. Right.
I can't believe that he was that quick to join the Lakers without the expectation of having a role. Because assuming he wants to play, I don't think just being in LA and being part of a championship team would be enough to entice him. Like, I'm not saying that he expects to be a 30-minute a night guy, but I would.
You're right.
That he thinks he's going to get 10 to 15 minutes regularly, semi-regularly.
It could go either way. It absolutely, because there are a lot of things here at play. And there are
sign with other teams.
Right. There are a lot of things here at play, because it could be that they wanted the model to be available to them. But whereas AD played about 40% of his minutes at 2 years ago, down to like 10. I throw everything out last year because it was just too weird a season. But, it was way down last year. Are we talking something that looks like it did the year they won the title? Is it that maybe plus 20 or, he plays 50 or 60% of his minutes there and you just cut down those center minutes of I don't care if he starts. Like, sometimes it's just easier in this and that. I'm much more concerned about the floor combinations and sort of the total time, with the assumption that most games he's going to play center in the fourth quarter. But you also may find yourself in a position where you have fewer close games to try to overcome or play hard, all that stuff, if he does it more during the game.
You mentioned floor combinations. It's easier to get better floor combinations if he starts.
If Anthony Davis.
This is why
this is a question matters. I did not get to ask. This is my little Zoom hand raised. This was the one that I wanted to ask Rob. Not that he was probably going to be specific in answering it, but that's what I wanted to ask him.
It gets to why I kept saying all through last season, Dennis Schroeder starting versus coming off the bench matters, because I think it affects floor combinations beyond his own, I think, lack of ideal use as a starter. All this
so
stuff
we'll see. We'll get a little more information from this next week from Frank Vogel. Certainly it'll be asked of Anthony Davis more than once when he meets with the media on Tuesday. So plenty more to come on this and some clarity, hopefully. Next, though, Andy, let's look at the vaccination question, because Pelinka had some, I thought, very important and encouraging answers on that. Not so much based on, are you an anti-vax or pro-vax or whatever. I'm talking about how this impacts the Lakers season, regardless of your stance on these things, which should be go get vaccinated, by the way. We'll do that next.
Locked on Lakers brought to you by Sleeper. In 2018, the fantasy sports experts at Sleeper realized that fantasy basketball was broken. Games were won and lost based on which players had more scheduled games that week. It made no sense. It required very little strategy. So in 2020, Sleeper released a brand new way of playing fantasy basketball. It's called Game Pick, and it's only available on Sleeper. In Game Pick, owners pick a single game per week for each starter to count towards their team's total score, ensuring an even number of games played between opponents. So there's no more losing sleep because your opponent's players had more scheduled games to play in that week. No more giving up halfway through the season because, man, there's so much busy work to account for, and that's not fun. And it's like, you got a life. But in Game Picks, you pick one game per week for each player based on player matchups, home versus away, opponent's defensive ranking, pace of play, yada, yada, yada. They offer redraft, they offer keeper, they offer dynasty, and you are going to love Game Picks. So download the Sleeper app, start a league with your friends today. You will not be disappointed.
Hey, Andy, does this sound familiar to you? You've got one device. No, let me finish.
Okay.
I'm not there yet. You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that you stream on your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone. You've got your neighbor's best friends, logins, girlfriends, husbands, cousins, something or other for like the layer login to pirate some sort of channel that you can't otherwise get. Now answer, does this sound familiar to you?
Yes, Brian, it does.
Now, I want to tell you then about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream. It brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device. It just occurred to me, like anybody listening to this would think we would probably have had this conversation more casually, but we never have. It's only right now I'm introducing this idea to
Once this podcast ends, you and I have absolutely no interest in what is going on in each other's lives.
No contact or anything. So anyway, no juggling remotes, no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, no annual contracts. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more about it at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. People, by the way, should be aware of that, because when our parents, for example, come in town for the holidays, all of the planning that we do for those weekends, it's going to happen on this podcast.
Yes.
We won't be doing it.
You'll be very excited to learn the Thanksgiving menu.
Yes. So vaccination, as we are learning in California, is a very important issue for getting your team on the floor, as Andrew Wiggins currently is not going to be able to play any home games for the Warriors. Because the rules are you have to be a vaccinated employee to show up in the building, and up in San Francisco and down here. I mean, and, he's not.
Glass half full. There's only 41 of them.
That's right. But I don't know if he could play in LA either. I'm not sure about Sacramento. So we're really starting to get into a fair amount of their schedule. But anyway, Pelinka was asked about the Lakers and their vaccination status, and he said that by opening night, all the players on their roster and team personnel will be vaccinated. Now, that it certainly implies that perhaps not everybody is fully vaccinated at this point because of the 2-week lags and all that kind of stuff. But regardless, once the season rolls around, this is not going to be an issue for the Lakers. Now, it doesn't mean that COVID won't impact the Lakers. There are breakthrough cases and things can happen.
We know people who've dealt with breakthrough cases.
But what it does mean is that the Lakers will have a much easier time with the protocols that the NBA appears to be setting around things, which are much easier on contact tracing, much easier on quarantine periods and all that kind of stuff for players who are asymptomatic and test negative and are vaccinated. And so while they might lose individual players, the Lakers much more likely now to not have any issues, both with the state of California, but also with the NBA, which is great to see. I mean, I think this will be the case for most teams across the league, but it's still nice to see.
Just not
the right thing to do.
Just not the ones employing Wiggins or presumably Kyrie Irving.
Right. Or if, Cole Beasley picks up a basketball, I suppose.
I mean, look, this is really important. I mean, beyond the health issues at play and the way we are all interconnected in this pandemic dilemma, whether we like it or not, and I decidedly vote not, we are all in this thing together. I would much prefer to be able to pull this off individually, but we can't.
No.
But when you start getting into the logistics of a season and all the different factors that come with trying to keep everybody, COVID safe and trying to do this as safely as possible, it, like you said, becomes that much easier when there's that one less thing to worry about with the vaccination status of the players. And, if somebody has to be separated, what you do with those protocols, because they are, my mind,
right now, it's like if you are an unvaccinated player, like you have to wear a mask, nobody else does. You have to be like separated from them on the plane. You have to be like, you basically are your own floating island.
Right. These are logistical issues for a team to have to deal with, and they're a pain in the ass over the course of an entire year. But I think what's also really good about this, really for any team, but I think specifically the Lakers, with what they've been through with the fatigue factor from last season, with the quick turnaround after winning the championship, and the concerns that were there last season when comparing chemistry from the championship team in 2020 versus 2021. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that made recreating that championship team's chemistry so difficult was the fact that guys couldn't hang out freely the same way. You don't get to know your teammates in the exact same.
Guys were pulled in and out. It just, it was harder. It was definitely harder.
It becomes easier to build that sense of camaraderie, and the season becomes more fun. Mm-hmm. It will be a more enjoyable season for everybody involved. And I don't care how much these guys talk about how much they love their jobs. They mean it. They consider themselves some of the luckiest people in the world, even though they earned everything that they got. These seasons are long, man. Like, they're long for us covering it, and we don't deal with like a tenth of the fatigue
the
that
travel
these guys go through.
None of this, right? The other part of this that was noteworthy. Rob Pelinka reinforced the idea that it is expected that the Lakers will be able to welcome a full crowd at Staples Center. Again, the rules around vaccination and proof of negative testing and all that kind of stuff that the state of California and the city have, notwithstanding, this California high vaccination rate, LA high, and people who show up are going to, if they want to go to the Laker game, they'll do it. So I have no concerns about that. The Lakers are going to play in front of a full house. And I think as much as any team in the league, they suffered from that. Like, that was a problem for them last year. It is difficult, and Pelinka talked about it, to get the energy up. Players talked about it. They will get a boost playing at home this year that they did not have last year. And particularly early, that's important because they play a ton of home games early, as they do in most seasons, to get off to a good start that gives them the flexibility to do things over the course of the season. Rest guys as needed, try lineup combinations. Getting off to a good start is important, and it will be easier for them to do it. They will be energized by having a crowd in the stands. It is not an insignificant, just sort of platitude for the fans to, talk about how much we love our guy. Like, it really does make a difference. And so that is another thing that if you're kind of sort of factoring in how you think the Lakers might play early, the idea that they're going to have a crowd in front of them is definitely something to look forward to. A couple other little things that Pelinka got into that are worth noting. Frank Vogel talked about this as well on the Lakers flagship TV station, Spectrum Sportsnet out here in LA. THT, Talen Horton-Tucker, specifically though, Andy, the defensive work that they are hoping to see from him this year. We'll talk about that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar ever, covered in 100% chocolate, soft, easy to chew, and they are healthy. They're great for health-conscious people, whether you're trying to lose or maintain weight. They're low calorie, they're low sugar, they're high protein, they're high fiber. They are great for the keto folks, and as always, taste. You've got the 12 original flavors like raspberry, coconut almond, salted caramel, banana bread, new flavors including cherry barcia, lemon almond cheesecake, cookies and cream. They're perfect for someone like me who doesn't want to feel bored like you're eating the same damn thing over and over and over. You've got really cool, unique, fun taste combinations. So go to BuiltBar.com, use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your first order. Again, promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com.
Football is back and better than ever, Andy. We're looking at week 3 already, and all eyes are on the gridiron as teams are fully rolling now into the football season. And as always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. New updated site, new interface, Andy. Even more odds, props, and contests. BetOnline.ag. It continues to be the number one source for everything football. So head on over to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 100% welcome bonus. That's double your initial deposit just for signing up. Don't forget to use the promo code NFL100. So from football, basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. Bet online. It's the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. Bet online, your online sportsbook experts. So, Andy, whether you're talking about Frank Vogel on Spectrum Sportsnet earlier this week or Rob Pelinka on Thursday afternoon, both of them asked about THT, and Vogel wasn't even asked. Like if you go into a podcast,
this was unprompted.
It was unprompted. Brought this up, and they both talked about his defense and the potential for THT to make an impact on that side of the ball more than what he did offensively and all that. And I think for me, this is sort of motivated by two things. First, I think they believe that he has the defensive tools. He's got 45-foot long arms. He's a good athlete. He's strong. He's a big kid. He's just not tall. And so I think they believe the physical tools are there. If you look at some of the numbers that, Tim over at basketballindex.com, Cranjis McBasketball puts out, they like some of his perimeter numbers are not bad as an on-ball defender. It's more the spatial awareness. So I think they have the tools, but also too, Andy, this is his path to have the largest impact on the Lakers this year, because this is what will keep him on the floor to do all the other stuff that gets people excited about THT's game.
Yeah, I mean, the fewer reasons that there are to take a developing player off the floor, the better the chances are that he stays there. And with THT, like, he doesn't have to be a stopper right now. As much as I think it was Frank Vogel talked about, like, guys, including Alex Caruso and KCP, and even to a lesser degree, Kuzma, Dennis Schroeder. What you lose defensively, Talen Horton-Tucker being asked to make up for some of that. I don't think there is any anticipation that he could be the type of stopper or playing that type of really high leverage individual assignment role that you had with Caruso or KCP especially. But what they do need to have happen is THT being able to stay on the floor without doing any harm. Like, he can't keep getting back cut constantly. Like, what you mentioned before, like spatial awareness, I would just expand it to just awareness of everything happening on the floor that does not involve the guy directly in front of his face.
And by the way, when you're 20 years old,
of course,
this is the stuff that is hard.
No, this isn't NBA. Being critical of THT. It's just somebody has to do this. Like, somebody has to help pick up that defensive slack. Like, we used to talk about this with Kobe all the time. Later in his career, before, pre-Achilles, like, in between, say, peak Mamba of 2006 to 2013 when he tore the Achilles, there were a couple years where Kobe's defensive reputation was more reputation than result.
No question.
But at the same time, like, there was an understanding that Kobe was getting up there in age. He still had a lot of responsibility, and there's only so much you can ask of him to be a true two-way player over the course of an entire season, however long they go into the playoffs. And that's fine. But at the same time, the stuff he's not doing defensively matters, even if it's totally understandable. So it needs to be made up for somewhere else. And in the case of THT, who's obviously the inverse of where, he is in his career and Kobe was in his, just because it's understandable that THT, even busting his ass, might still make these mistakes or might not have this awareness, it matters. Even if it's understandable, it still matters.
What they need is predictability. They need to know what where are his shortcomings, and those shortcomings, if they're repeated over and over again, even if they're problematic, can be compensated for by other. The problem is when you're not predictable. Oh, wait, he made this mistake this time, but then, we blew that assignment here, but he covered it this time. That gets coaches, that makes it hard. And Pelinka made it very clear that part of the reason they feel confident in the approach that they have this year, and you called it the Coach Vogel effect, the Frank Vogel effect, is he believes that, we may have opened up some holes for ourselves by letting go of the guys we did, trading the guys that we did, and bringing in guys who aren't as solid on that side of the ball. At least that we know it. We don't know the fit. We think Vogel can make this work. He has shown, and showed last year particularly, the ability to make chicken bleep into chicken salad, as the saying goes. And so they are expecting that. And
or maybe just low end chicken into organic chicken. Chicken bleep
said,
might be a little too strong.
And it doesn't, he doesn't have to, THD doesn't have to be better than Caruso, in part because I think the team is going to be a little bit different and all that.
He's also not going to be better than Caruso.
But he also is better, but he's also going to contribute more offensively.
Yes, he will.
And so that's my point. It's like he brings more on the other end. So if he raises one, then you're getting, it's okay. Right. And so that part to me, the reliance on Vogel, I think, to help kind of smooth out these edges and fill these cracks and scheme their way around this stuff, is definitely a part of what they're doing going forward. Last thing, and we'll get it. All this stuff is going to be we're going to get back into it next week after media day. But one thing that I thought was really interesting, he talked about LeBron slimming down. I'm very interested to see what that looks like, because LeBron is a lean fellow already. I assume he means just slightly less muscular, a little bit but I'm curious what that looks like, and I'm curious what that how that translates onto the floor. And then the other thing that I thought
he said he thought that it would make him a little bit more explosive, and what that means, whether in terms he's talking about just the ability to rip and run rebounds and keep everything in transition, or where they're thinking about using him on the floor, like 3 versus 4 versus
all that.
One,
I want to hear what LeBron has to say about his body, because he obviously takes enormous pride in it and likes talking about it. So training regimen, what he's going
shirtless
for
constantly.
I would be too. This is not a criticism. I wouldn't own shirts.
No, he's the Matthew McConaughey of the NBA.
And he talked as well, Pelinka did, about the training staff, and they're moving a little bit towards a customized training model, where I'm not sure how different this is than what they were doing before. Pretty sure KCP's training program didn't look like Marc Gasol's last year. If it did, then they all did deserve to be fired, but I'm pretty sure that's not what happened. But the broader point here is it's a brand new training staff that is going to be under tremendous scrutiny, given the stakes of the season, given the injury histories of the stars, and given the overall age of the roster. And so learning more about what they do, and it is a reminder that these guys are going to have an enormous magnifying glass on them as a brand new staff. So kind of an underrated, high pressure addition to the Lakers roster this year. That struck me as interesting.
Well, I mean, when you have that many new pieces like the Lakers have, the details matter. Like there's a lot of new information that you're keeping track of, and one of those things is going to be, what is the best way to keep all of these very different guys, at particular stages in their careers healthiest, whether you're talking about the workout regimens, whether you're talking about diet, all of that stuff. Like it's not going to be one size fits all. So again, it just speaks to me about details.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if people do get hurt, who gets blamed, because the eyes always look at the training staff, but it's not always
running out of dudes.
Yep. All right. So got a great show coming on Friday. We actually recorded it earlier on Thursday with Nick Angstad of Locked On Mavs. This was before we even knew Pelinka was speaking, and it doesn't change substantively what it talked about. So that's a great show for Friday into the weekend. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube, Cam Brothers on Twitter. Appreciate you guys joining us every day, as you do, and hopefully will throughout the season. And we'll see everyone on Friday.